prepping for how to build a culture of embracing mistakes. We're here to talk about really what we found to be effective for building culture, for growing team, for building organizations, for getting effective adoption of different ideas or changes within an organization throughout the organization, but also what mistakes we've made as leaders towards getting some of the initiatives we want to get accomplished. We are hosting an executive symposium this Thursday in Austin, Texas. If you are watching this and you're thinking to yourself, I would love to go, I love to meet with other executives, I love to meet with these three great executives here on our pre-symposium panel right now, come to the symposium on Thursday. I'll post a link to RSVP in the link for this post. But yeah, we're here to talk about how to build a culture of embracing mistakes. I'm Garrett. I'm the founder of Ambition Emotion. At Ambition Emotion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they're there, their expectations meet reality. And when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe it starts with leaders, because leaders create the experiences that employees have while at work. So we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves. And in part of building community, we have these events like symposiums. So I love to introduce you all to our three esteemed colleagues here in our panel this morning. We've got Sneha, we've got Judy, we've got Christina. Sneha, do you mind introducing yourself?
Not at all. Hello, everybody. My name is Sneha. I lead engineering for a B2B2C SaaS product that helps people find the homes that they love. I have a background in startups on the product engineering and operations side. Industry-wise, currently I'm in real estate, but previously I've also dabbled in prop tech and construction. And super excited to be here and hear from my fellow panelists.
Very cool. Judy, how about you? Oh, Judy, you're muted.
Not good. Hi, I'm Judy Foley. I am actually a supply chain and operations executive. I work for big companies like Motorola, Allstate, CNA, consulted for Kraft Foods, and went into the middle market, and have also worked for privately owned. So I've had the opportunity to see a number of things that have been beneficial throughout my career. And I look forward to speaking to you today.
Yeah. Christina, how about you?
Thanks so much, Garrett. Christina Costello, I've done about a decade in consumer brands, so marketing strategy for brands you probably know well, like Michelob Ultra, Black & Decker, as well as now in Kraft Heinz. So really excited to have this conversation and be here with this group today. But a lot of the experiences I've had and moments of learning that have made this a very healthy topic. And I think coming into new organizations and being a part of ones that have sort of disrupted and changed the world, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, let's dive in. So the topic is how to build a culture of embracing mistakes. I think like if we would have had this event 20 years ago, I feel like people would have said, are you nuts? What are you talking about? We don't talk about making mistakes here. We're perfectionists. We don't have any issues. I guess I'd be curious to know, just from your experiences as a leader over time, how do you feel like this concept of mistakes has evolved from maybe 20 years ago until now? And why do you think there's more of an appetite for building a culture of embracing mistakes? What have you found to be some of the changes that you've observed over time? Who wants to kick it off?
Go for it.
Go ahead.
Go for it, Jody. You got it.
I was just going to say, I actually came from an organization early on in my career, Motorola, that actually did embrace mistakes and wanted people to take risks and step out. So I think that has allowed me to be able to take those risks throughout my career. And I think it's elevated others too, to be able to step out of their comfort zone and take some risks to develop new skills, leadership skills, change management, a lot of different things that I think benefit an organization if you're willing to take risks. Plus, I think as a company, they were really good about looking at like Six Sigma. They were leading edge for a number of things. And I think that also put them out there where they were making some mistakes themselves and they had to self-correct. So I think that was beneficial and it's helped me throughout my career.
Yeah, Christina, Sneha, what have you seen in terms of the evolution around the notion of mistakes within a culture?
I think it's definitely changed. In my mind, sort of what Judy mentioned, it starts with yourself. Like first you start having mistakes in an organization. And I think at Nestle, when I started my career there, I was in the DSD side of the business. So managing frontline sales teams with sometimes a decade more experience than me. So it started with like that organization wasn't necessarily like, let's go make mistakes, but it was like, make sure that you're learning from people that know more than you and being a student in this career of yours. So for me, it was like the learning was a sense of like, it's okay to fail as long as we're progressing, we're learning, we're collaborating with others. So it wasn't like in the beginning of my career, like, yeah, go fail. I think it's now much more a healthy conversation of what did we learn from this? And that's, I think, seen across CPG and other brands as you look at how brands have evolved, they've fallen down in moments that were culturally imperative for them to show up. So for me, it's one, realizing as an individual, it's healthy. Two, I think companies have evolved the way they talk about learnings from said mistakes. And then three is like the celebration of curiosity and being a student to things has continued to evolve. I think, especially when you look at the Instagrams and TikToks and even LinkedIn's of the world, where people are starting to show their imperfections as leaders. And that's changed the way we talk about it as a culture in my industry. But I think as professionals across the country, it's becoming much more sort of an awareness driver for everyone of we're not perfect. We are making mistakes, whether they're celebrated or not. So let's talk about how we change and grow from them. And that's what I've seen in my careers. But it ultimately started with me being comfortable failing alone and understanding how to grow from that. And I think in time that's changed as a collective for the industry.
You know, Christina, you mentioned something really fascinating, and I'd be curious to learn your thoughts on this. And Judy and Sneha, I'd love to learn your thoughts on this as well. But this notion of early on in your career, people weren't saying go out and make mistakes, but as you accelerated in your career path, people were more patient with mistakes. And as long as you learn from them, I guess the question is, is it a product of being early in your career, people are maybe less patient with mistakes, or was it the evolution of time about how we think about mistakes, or is it a combination of both, do you think, that led to that sort of outcome?
I think it's both, right? When you start your career, it's not like you go into an organization feeling comfortable showing anything less than 100%. As a new employee, there's a lot of pressure to just show up and do the best you can, even if you don't always know from an executive level what the best is, right? So I think it's first and foremost, like, you want to do your best, and there's going to be the reality as you grow in your career that that's not always going to happen, even if you want it to every day. And I think the second part of that question was really around, as you get more senior, you're able to embrace it and be more transparent. So I think there's that piece of like, it's gonna happen whether it's accepted or not. But then the more leaders around you and above you are transparent with their own failures, I think that's evolved. But then the technology and sort of visibility piece is a second nuance that has forced cultures, companies, and leaders to just be more transparent in the way they talk about their own failures, because they're happening, whether it's stock prices falling or brands saying the wrong things. Like, it's happening and it has to be addressed now because there's a cancel culture, right? So like, if you don't address it, it will be addressed regardless. So I think the idea of failure has become more mainstream in a sense. And I think culture at the beginning, it was work hard, do the best you can. And the best was like, don't mess this up, right? So I think it's changed a little bit, but it's more in the approach, not necessarily in the appreciation of the lessons learned.
And I would probably add to that too. I think really from a change standpoint, everything is changing so quickly. If you think about technology, AI, everything that's coming at us, we have to be willing to be flexible. And those people that aren't willing to be flexible and learn new things, they're going to have to make mistakes along the way to actually succeed. So if we aren't willing to do that, then we're not going to probably fly to the top, and we want to fly to the top.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm on the software side of things, right? So we're famous for like the fail fast culture, and being open to risk and the reward that comes with it. And so I feel like embracing mistakes is sort of part of the program, and kind of goes hand in hand with a growth mindset, in my opinion. Like, anybody who's looking to leave their comfort zone is bound to make a mistake or two. But it's up to us as leaders, as people who establish organizations, to essentially foster a learning environment so that not only that person is learning from it, but the rest of us are learning from it as well, and take those lessons, across the enterprise. So the second part about when do you actually get comfortable? For me, I think it came over time. I feel like, especially having gone through an engineering degree, it's little room for mistake as you're getting through that. And so, your first job into the role, you're trying to do the best you can, and you're bound to make mistakes. You might have leaders that, are not telling you how grave those mistakes might be, and you're doing a great job. But over time, I think as you start to understand how organizations function, how software is built, or really just how any product is positioned in the market, you start to understand that mistakes are being made all of the time. And to your point, Christina, it's already happening. So either we can, push it under the rug, or we can actually talk about it.
Sneha, you bring up a really fascinating point that I think does happen in cultures. And I would love to learn, what do you think the best methodologies to go about this? But one thing that you highlighted was sometimes leaders will become this buffer for their team members if they make a mistake, where they say like, oh no, it's okay, and they don't actually fully understand the ramifications of that mistake because the leader's just eating it, and they're just like, okay, we'll figure it out, like I'll smooth it over, like I don't want you to feel any concern. What is the healthiest approach to go about communicating, like, hey, there are some consequences for these actions, but I don't want you to stop like trying new things. Like, please keep making mistakes, it's good, but like don't keep making the same mistake over and over again and thinking that it's not a big deal, because there are some consequences that I'm as a leader, I'm personally paying for, but I love to not stifle innovation, but at the same time understand where that boundary is. Or maybe you shouldn't add it all. I don't know. What are your thoughts on how to go about finding where those boundaries are?
I'll take that one first. So look, I'm in the software world, right? Website's going to crash or take too long to load. User flows are going to break. People are going to get angry, whether it's your business partner, whether it's your customer. Like, there's some hate coming your way. Stuff happens, and somebody needs to take responsibility. But finger pointing or playing the blame game will essentially just create a toxic culture that's going to be detrimental to all progress. And it's possible that you don't even solve the problem at hand. Beyond that, there's obviously the feeding of distrust and resentment. So what I've come to find is the best things that work is just starting with why and unpacking the facts. What do we know? What don't we know? What are some of the things that we should explore, so that we have a path to ensure that this doesn't happen again, this specific mistake. So learning from it. And I'm sure there's variations of it, especially in my line of work, where you solve for a problem and a similar one arises again. But so long as you're growing and making progress, and I guess adding to your awareness, because there's piece about knowledge, the things that you do know, and then awareness, the things that happen around you, and then you get educated on the things that you don't know. And so that balance between knowledge and awareness sort of is a dance that comes over time, with essentially just unpacking the why is this happening and what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Excellent. And I think I'd like to just add on to that. I think it's also understanding who your leaders are, like who are you reporting to, what are their expectations, and also who is their boss, because that plays into the whole big picture as to how they're going to accept mistakes. And then, like you said, Sneha, it was actually looking at what root cause and resolution and making sure it doesn't happen again. I think that is right on.
I love that. And Sneha, what you mentioned.
Oh, Christina, I think we might have lost you for a second, but hopefully you'll be able to hop back on again. Judy, that's interesting. This point you brought up about what, so Christina, we just lost you. Do you mind reiterating what you just said?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Perfect.
You're frozen. Okay, but we can hear you, and that's what's most important.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so when I'm thinking about the why plus the facts, as Sneha mentioned, I think.
Uh-oh. No, we lost you. Shoot. Well, Christina, while you're reconnecting, Judy, the question I have for you is, you talk about this notion of, when it comes to this balancing act between accountability and like free innovation without any ramifications for any mistakes, you talk about it depends on what their boss and their boss's boss's drivers are or incentives are. And I think incentives play a really big role in how they impact the culture. And I don't think enough companies take the time to really intentionally think about what are the incentives that we are putting out there and how does that impact the culture. So if, for example, a CTO's incentive is to come out with a new product innovation every 2 weeks, and customers are saying, hey, these are way too many innovations, please stop changing the product. We really liked it the way it was 8 weeks ago, and now you've changed it and it's really messing with me. But their incentive structure, their bonus plan is that they're never stopping to innovate, and it's frustrating the customers. It creates this this frustration. And so I guess the question I'm asking is, how can you go about, one, identifying the right incentives for the executive team, or iterating those incentives when you realize, ooh, this did not have the right impact on the people that we thought it would have?
Well, I think generally senior leadership actually has exactly what their objectives are. So you're clear about that up front. So that's, I think, really important. And then I think it's really understanding how your manager responds or your leader responds, and really how the leader above you responds. I think if you can look at those things, you can determine, okay, really, is the culture going to be as accepting of this issue? Or, and it's also being really honest. I mean, if you catch that you made a mistake, go ahead, own it, and make sure that your management is aware of it, because I think it's about trust too. Do they trust that you're doing a really good job, and are you owning what you've set out to accomplish? And if there's a problem, addressing it. So those are the kind of things that I would say are important. And then really understanding with that leadership team, what their expectations are already that have been outlined, and making sure if those are things that you've got to really hit, that hopefully you don't make mistakes on those really big opportunities, and that it's something else where you're being more innovative, that maybe you've made a mistake, but you can at least explain it and come back and approach it and resolve it quickly.
I like that. I think that makes sense, but I would love to learn, what are your thoughts on how to go about rectifying unintended consequences for incentive plans that maybe in theory made a lot of sense, but in actuality hindered the user experience or hindered the company in some way or another that was unexpected?
I think you have to address those things directly. If you see, like, I've seen where goals have been established that are in conflict with each other, and that can be within the same organization. So it's really tying the goals together, but sometimes organizations don't even see that they're in conflict. And so different departments can be in conflict with each other. So helping address those things, being straightforward, saying, here's what I'm seeing from a conflict standpoint and how that may be impacting us as far as our results, and really working through that. I think senior management, when they see that, in a lot of cases will fix it. They don't always. And when they don't, you still have to work through it.
But let's dive into that from a hierarchical standpoint. I think you're absolutely right. I think in reality, that is the best and ideal outcome for a scenario like this. But what typically happens, at least from what I've observed, is you have someone who's maybe a director, you know, a few layers down from the C-suite executive team, and they're like, oh my gosh, these incentive structures have literally goals butting heads, and these C-suite have their heads up their butts and they're not paying any attention, and they've got no idea what's going on, and you're stewing about it and stewing about it and stewing about it. And then when the executive team says, hey, what are your thoughts on the goals and incentive plans? You say, oh, they look great, I'm doing my best to try to achieve them. And all the feedback they get is like, oh, I'm amazing, oh my gosh, like these incentives are fantastic, like nothing's an issue here. But because we fear getting fired, we fear potentially being let go, we fear potentially offending someone who's above us, we are a little bit afraid of being objective and clear and direct with them. So how can you go about that conversation without actually getting fired, or at least, or maybe risking getting fired, but knowing that it was worth it because it made the working situation better? How do you go about rectifying that kind of balancing act?
honestly, I'm a pretty direct person. So I do go direct, and I just I think people have realized that about me in any organization I've been at, and I just address it. And sometimes it's not as acceptable, but I would say 98% of the time it is. It's all in how you approach it. And you help them see why this is maybe not to the benefit of the organization. If you just come in and say, what do they always say? Never come in with just a problem and not a way to fix it. If you come in with a problem, but you don't have a way to fix it, no one wants to work with you. But if you can come in and say, here's what I'm seeing, and here's what I think would be a better approach, I think you're going to have a lot better opportunity to influence that. It's not going to always work, because there's going to be some things maybe that as a leader you're not understanding fully until you actually are talking through it with the senior leadership. But I do think you have to take a risk. Some people are afraid, like fear stops them from addressing it. But if you don't take that step out, you're never going to really resolve some of those issues. So that's my perspective. But I am very direct.
Judy, I'm actually the same way. I tend to get that feedback a lot as well. And my view on this is, look, the first 90 days in any organization, you're on a listening tour, you're understanding how the machine works, and you're building your opinion, you're building rapport, and you haven't really done much for people to trust in you, and kind of know that you're going to deliver for them. But I think after that, you want to be able to offer up that report with that sort of problem and solution framework to your leadership to really quickly assess of, are they bought into this? Do they understand, problems that are occurring in the organization? And then get a sense of, your leadership and their adaptability to some of these things. And I think that would be a good tell early on, rather than, working somewhere for a long time and then bringing up problems randomly and then, surprising your leadership. But I think the other aspect of it, as leaders ourselves, I think there's, psychological safety that's important at work for people to feel like they're not going to be punished if they brought problems your way. And if you're, acknowledging that mistakes are inevitable, you're allowing your employees to experiment and take risks without the fear of embarrassment. You're essentially just encouraging good problem solving and collaboration. And, sometimes those solutions don't see the light of day. I have a lot of tickets that, haven't made it to production yet. But at the end of the day, it fosters that, sense of learning and innovation no matter what. And it's okay to fail. It's okay to find a solution to a problem and bring it up to your leadership. And, it can get accepted or not, but there's just so many factors on, how companies succeed and teams succeed. So I think it's important to just have the right training wheels in place for our teams, and just encourage that sort of openness and honesty across the board.
Neha, I actually love the comment you made on psychological safety, because that's actually something that is obviously a big conversation that leaders are having right now as we go from COVID back to work, hybrid and remote. All these things are changing. And I think as we look at leaders, we have to constantly, and Reggie Butler, who's a big speaker on this, has been a huge partner in mine in building that across teams of, do we understand psychological safety as we go to address problems? Do we as leaders actually capture the different layers of psychological safety in a way that we feel our entire workforce can have those hard conversations all the way up to executives? And then another thing I think that we started to do in that process is actually survey our teams, not only for like engagement, but also on experiences they have. My team sends out surveys and says, how close to the vision do you feel? How accurately can you speak to leaders on these issues? How close do you feel the solution versus the vision, right? So it's like not only engaging with how they experience psychological safety, but how we're continuing to build it in different moments and diverse settings. So I'm glad you said that.
Ooh, I think I've got an opportunity for disagreement. Like, nobody wants to be on or watch a panel where everybody's in agreement and say, oh, I second this or I third this. But I've got some nuanced disagreement here or interesting wrinkles. And I'll lay it out. And it's the dichotomy, it's the not just even conflict, but it's the notion of psychological safety versus don't come to me with problems unless you've got a solution. And I'll lay it out like this. Let's say I work on a manufacturing line for a car company, and all the front windshields that are coming out keep having a crack right in the middle of them. But I'm not an expert in glass windshields. I've got no idea how the glass is made. I've got no idea how the glass is manufactured. I can look into it, but I still may not necessarily know why the glass is cracked, but I know it's not supposed to be cracked. This thing is definitely not supposed to be here. And if the notion is, okay, don't come to me with problems unless you've got a solution, I might say, I don't actually have a solution, so I don't feel the psychological safety to feel comfortable to come with you with just the problem. Say, I don't actually know what to do here. I just know this is not supposed to be right. And then all of a sudden we've got a bunch of cars with cracked windshields on it. And we're like, why the heck did we get this to the lot? This shouldn't have even made it out the front door. And so I guess, yeah, Judy, Christina, Sneha, what are your thoughts on this kind of this, not conflict, but this notion of psychological safety versus don't come to me with a problem unless you've got a solution? And maybe there isn't a conflict, I don't know, but that's something that's I'm ruminating right now in my mind, is like, there could be, I could fear lacking comfort bringing up a problem if I don't have a solution, and that could impact my psychological safety and or willingness to bring it up.
But I think that's going to be dependent upon the culture. And then also, I think part of it's going to be about resources. Like, think about it. We don't all have the answers. So it's sometimes knowing where to get the answers and going to the right people to do that. And you also have to have trust within the organization, so that, let's say you don't know the answer, that you've got a major problem and you don't know the answer. You need to be able to go to some leader within the organization and say, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what the problem is. I'm not 100% sure how to resolve this. I'm thinking I'd go to this person. What do you say? What do you suggest? So at least you have someone that's a confidant that you really do trust, that will point you in the right direction if you don't know where to go. But most of us, I think, have an idea where we need to go. We just need someone maybe to reconfirm or suggest some other things that we're not thinking about. Especially when you're newer within an organization, that really helps a great deal. So that's my perspective.
I have a little bit of dissent on this piece. And I think, Garrett, I'll play into this a little bit. Sometimes there aren't solutions, in my opinion. Like, sometimes it actually takes the leaders, they're going to come with a resolution, but it may take 3 or 4 iterations. And I think that's the trust piece that's required. And I think when you go down layers in the organization, Garrett, to your point, the person rolling that thing off the manufacturing line that's seeing the crack, they might not yet be in a place where they have a solution or even know the problem. And the executive far, far away from the problem doesn't have a connection to that person at all, right? So I think that's where there's got to be trust in the process of failing. To Sneha's point on websites, they might fail and glitch. My Zoom might drop for the next 20 minutes. Who knows? I can't fix that right now, and there is no solution. The Wi-Fi's up, everything's working theoretically, right? So I think there's places in the timing of leaders to say, look, there isn't a good solution. Here are the 3 or 4 things we're going to track towards. And that might not work either, because we don't always have those answers. And I think you saw that during COVID. Everyone's like, oh, we'll be back to office in a month. We'll be back to office in a day. Everything will be fine next week. Everyone get vaccinated. It was a very tense time because there wasn't a solution and there wasn't a foreseeable future for one. So I do think there's moments where it's more about, can you have dissent and comfortable conversations with it to make sure, and respectful, Judy, to your point, being respectful, having the trust to do that and go there. But you want to build a culture where even the guy watching the car come off the line, or girl watching the car come off the line, could call the CEO and say, hey, this is a bigger problem, and I actually don't know where we start, but we should talk. And that's not a fun conversation, but that dissent is going to start a different sort of routine and process where you start to build visibility on how do we have dissenting and sort of diverging conversations, but still find sort of long-term changes and results, knowing that in the short term, it might not be an immediate thing you can resolve, because there are a lot of those things when you look at portfolios or brands or manufacturing where there isn't a fast solve. It's maybe 5 years worth of work.
And can I just add one thing to that is, I think too, when you have major problems, you usually utilize like sometimes cross-functional teams, because maybe you don't have the expertise fully as one individual, but multiple people bringing resolution to that issue may. So I've seen that work very effectively. Sneha, did you want to add anything?
Sure. So obviously, as soon as I heard that, I'm just like, that person should be talking to quality assurance, because surely it is somebody's job to check on the cracked windshield. But I think more broadly, if you're finding a problem, you probably want to channel some level of curiosity and escalate it to a peer or, somebody that you were able to talk to. Of course, it all comes down to the organizational structures and how open we are overall. But I think communication just becomes the key, right? Like not only in terms of escalation, but us as leader, when things do come to your desk and you kind of have to decide on how to solve for it, or like Christina pointed out, maybe you don't have the solution, being able to communicate that back. Hey, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Here's how we're going to solve for it. And then also just taking that beyond, right? So not only to the person that brought us a problem, but also partners, customers, depending on the impact of the problem. I'm actually reading this book right now. It's Build by Tony Fadell. And he's talking about building the Nest thermostat and how there was a feature which was waving to essentially turn off the, I think it was the fire alarm version. So Nest as a company built a thermostat and fire alarm as well. And then when they were doing some testing, the flame rose so high that the flame itself waved at the alarm and it shut the alarm off. Serious problem for a product that's built to save lives. And that was a really fascinating story, because I was just like, wow, like that's a recall kind of situation and lots of communication, and people were, there's buzz in the media about it. But yeah, he just spoke about communication as well, even in that scenario where the stakes are so high. So I feel like it's important to build cultures that allow for open communication, but then also that follow through. Like you brought up something to me. What did we actually do with that information? And, keeping them in the fold, I think is a useful strategy.
I like
Yeah,
that.
question for you on that. When you're bringing solutions to people, and I think this is like a sensitive subject because sometimes we want to communicate a solution quickly and have it solved fast. When have you seen it be that we are communicating solutions too quickly that actually don't end up being the right solution for the problem? Like when you hear a customer say, oh, and we can say, oh, we heard you, but then they actually feel completely misunderstood. Like, have you seen that happen? Are there places where we're speaking too soon on a solution?
So I am a highly conservative person. So I tend to, give some broad brushstrokes around how we're going to attempt to solve the problem, rather than, offering up solutions, because, in technology, there's so many unknowns and we have to go back and check so many other related systems that it's hard to opine quickly when problems come up. What I do try to do is manage their expectations. And not just customers, but even business partners, right? Because as soon as something goes down, the expectation is, oh yes, all hands on deck, everybody's working and not leaving this room until we figure this out. And in reality, there are dependencies. There might be somebody who's offshore and you frankly don't know how to access a certain system or get logs out of it. So what I try to do is rather than offer a quick solution that feels like a pain reliever, I tend to just offer context and reassurance that we are looking at all angles and we will report back as soon as we know. So that way, I'm not putting that kind of pressure on my team or other people involved when there are still so many unknowns.
Sneha, Christina, I love this question. And Sneha, you kind of alluded to this before, but I want to walk us down the primrose path of this good old fashioned gaslight from leadership. So we're in a scenario where we've got goals or we identify problems and we go to our leader, we go to our leader's leader, we're like, hey, we're noticing this problem. Here are some proposed solutions. And they say something along the lines of like, we don't really need to solve that. Just keep on keeping your heads down. I know this is super innovation, but just keep doing it, because they've got some other incentive that they don't want to like mess with this ecosystem, but they're not communicating that to you. How do you go about overcoming perhaps this, whether we call it gaslighting, whether we call it you feel unheard, how do you go about overcoming that scenario? Because that's another thing that happens all the time, where you've got a C-suite executive, you've brought the challenge to them, and they say, I hear the challenge, but it's not a priority right now. I can't tell you why, but keep on keeping on. How do you handle that? Like, how do you address a scenario like that?
I'll answer first. This is a tricky one. I will say, like, I think there's a lot of layers. And when you think about gaslighting, I still think we're very much in a place of learning and educating ourselves as human beings on, one, what that means, how to unpack it when it happens. But for me, the first resolution is always sitting down with that person or sitting down with that group and trying to double click into what information can I give them that makes them feel recognized, makes them feel heard, makes them feel as if they're being brought along. Because it's usually that, right? We're usually trying to keep things back to protect a group, but in an effort to protect them, we actually do more damage than not. So I think what I've noticed, and this is purely my opinion, not representative of anyone else, but it's an idea of, can you really hear everything that they're feeling, thinking, experiencing without any sort of bias or observation of your own? Like, truly just try and put yourself in their place and their experiences, and then give them as much information as you can to make them understand and see.
No. Well, yeah, I was gonna say, Judy or Sneha, if you want to jump in, or, oh, sorry, Christina, you were just finishing up that point. Judy, Sneha, if you want to dive in, yeah, what are your thoughts on how to go about handling a scenario where you've gone to your senior leadership, you've conveyed what the problem is, and they seem to kind of brush it off as not a big deal, and just to tell you, keep on doing what you're doing. And it's almost like the Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth situation. But how do you go about getting either the truth out or figuring out what the heck is going on here and why this isn't being heard or prioritized?
Well, I do think you can ask. I think there's going to be some times where you're just not going to necessarily understand every aspect of it, because there are times that management won't necessarily communicate all the details. And sometimes they do give you marching orders that are not exactly what you're expecting. But I've always asked enough. I've usually asked questions. And then if I'm getting shut down for some reason, I also am smart enough to understand that I'm treading into waters that I shouldn't be going into, and they don't want to answer those questions any further. So I would say, listen to what's being said, definitely understand as much as you can. And then if it's something that's not, if they're basically blocking you or in some way detouring you in another direction, be at least understanding what those signs are, and then maybe determining a different approach to handling this. Sneha, do you have anything to say in regards to that?
I would say channel empathy. Empathy comes up a lot when we build products, and we try to channel empathy for the customer. And, there's design thinking and all of that around that as well. I think we should channel empathy towards our leaders as well, because something can be the biggest problem in our team or the product that we're building, but our leader is then responsible for multiple of those, right? And so they're just having to understand and prioritize, frankly, which is the biggest fire to address at the moment. So oftentimes something that could be very big for us may not resonate directly because they're dealing with other challenges. It could be priority, it could be market and financials, so many things. And depending on where you are in the organization, you may be privy to those conversations, and it's possible you weren't. So I think just channeling that level of empathy that we give to others, to our leaders as well, and knowing that there's probably other things that are taking up space in their brain, priorities that they're having to rationalize. But as leaders, then, if we do expect that, and people give us the benefit of that empathy, once again, just, expressing that rather than being dismissive or brushing off that this is, not a big problem for me, or I don't have time for this right now. I think really just sharing what you can, and there may be times where you're not at the liberty to share too much, but what you can, so that you're building that culture of, hey, you can come talk to me, and going back to that communication piece from earlier of, I understand and thank you for bringing this problem to my attention. We're working through A, B, and C right now, but this is definitely something that I'd like to address. I think those would be useful things that we can do as leaders.
Does empathy compete with curiosity in your mind? In that scenario that you just laid out? Because like in that
That's actually pretty fascinating.
Yeah, because think about it. It's like, if we're giving empathy, it's like, hey, I don't necessarily want to explain this or take the time to explain this. I just want you to empathize that I've got competing priorities and just like get back to it and do your thing. Or I was gonna say, does empathy compete with curiosity in this scenario?
So personally, for me, I would expect that somebody's coming in with empathy, but if they are extremely curious about it, and they've talked to other people, they have a draft on potential solutions, I think that alone would make me a little bit more excited about that problem, because this person has done so much of the legwork and it means so much to them that before coming to me, that they've done all of that research. So I think curiosity is probably ranking a little bit higher than empathy in my mind, but again, everybody's different. But I think that we don't give our leaders enough credit, and in some ways, it's almost like oh yeah, I'll just go to them and make it their problem. But recognize that there's 7, 8 of you that report to them, so they have a variation of many problems that they're trying to tackle at any given point.
I actually think that's a huge piece of it. Is like empathy and curiosity to me are parallels. I don't think there's ever a moment that they're competing per se. It's more of the sense that empathy, especially for leaders, like you don't always know the 9 other things going on in an employee's life and vice versa in the CEO's life. There's so many layers to that, but there's also so many different ways that you can get curious and build those sort of moments to understanding. And I think that's where there's this huge opportunity, especially when you look at like kind of to what I mentioned earlier on, like social media, you start to see, and this is big in my role as a leader, is sharing on Instagram, like not Instagram, LinkedIn, not only what I do at work, but also what I do outside of work. So I think it's like build the human element for all leaders and all employees, right? Because then as they come with problems, you're like, oh, I actually know that this leader is going through 5 other things in their personal life. So maybe this decision is really important. And there's also these 6 other international business units having challenges that maybe they need to address first. So it's like, I think the cross empathy building can also be included in that curiosity, right? Because like if you ask the right questions around the human experience and also the work experiences, you start to find these places where you can quickly build empathy. And it's through that curiosity of like, okay, what else might be a reason they're not talking about this problem or deprioritizing its emphasis when I think it's number 1. So I think that piece is like where I see them as 2 parallels. And Judy, I'm curious for you as like an external sort of consultant advisor, how you see it, because it's definitely like, it could be conflicting, but I think they're more parallel in like what questions you're asking.
Honestly, both of you have covered it really well. I think when I look at it, I think from a curiosity standpoint, I'm not afraid to ask the questions, but I do think just like when I've been in leadership and been a part of an organization, I also know that there's times when they are not going to communicate every aspect of what's going on. And you have to be able to read in between the lines. And the same thing happens within consulting. So you have to be aware of what is going on, where there's an opportunity to make an impact, and also understand when they're shutting it down for some reason, and being able to listen to that and determine, is it big enough that you're going to approach it, or are you going to back off and approach the other big issues that they've already outlined?
Well, Sneha, Judy, Christina, this has been an awesome conversation, a really great dialogue. Took it in a very different direction than what I was expecting going into the conversation, but we didn't even get to all the questions that I had, but it's great. It was just essentially a really good conversation because we took it in a fantastic direction. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and your perspective with our audience. And for our audience, thanks for watching. If you are interested in joining the Executive Symposium, meeting these 3 incredible leaders, come. I'll put the link in the information on this in the comment section to RSVP. If you have any questions, send me a direct message. This Thursday, July 27th, 5 p.m. at Accenture in downtown Austin. Would love to see you there. Thanks for your time.